I'm an angry Glimmerwasp. I'll tell you what I want to do. I want to fly into your home and jabstick stab sting you. Welcome to the Uncommon Commander, my card game compatriots, a channel where you get subjected to terrible poetry before being allowed to see the rest of the deck. My name is Ryan, and I am your host. Today's deck is going to be commanded by Zabaz, the Glimmerwasp. This legendary artifact creature, insect, starts off as a 1-mana 0/0. It also has 4 abilities. The first is Modular 1. Zabaz does not come equipped with reminder text, so allow me to remind you myself what Modular does. This creature enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. When it dies, you may put its +1/+1 counters on target artifact creature. Zabaz also has, if a modular triggered ability would put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature you control, that many +1/+1/+1 counters are put on it instead. Great wording choices is the coast, and not at all confusing to those who are listening but not watching. I do want to mention that Zabaz enters with 1 +1/+1 counter on it, not 2. Also, other modular creatures will enter with a number of +1/+1 counters on them equal to their modular ability, even with Zabaz in play. So a modular 2 enters with 2 counters. A modular 3 enters with 3. So this second ability on Zabaz really only works when a modular creature dies, and gives its +1/+1 counters to another target artifact creature. Hopefully that's clear. If you still have questions about how that ability works, feel free to leave a comment and I'll be sure to answer them. Zabaz also has 2 activated abilities. The first says, pay 1 red mana, destroy target artifact you control. The other says, pay 1 white mana, Zabaz the Glimmerwasp gains flying until the end of the turn. So, Zabaz's red mana ability is very close to making him a sacrifice outlet for our own artifacts and artifact creatures, and he gives us a benefit when those creatures die as long as they have the modular ability. And if we do sacrifice our own modular artifact creatures, Zabaz can be the target of them, and power up very quickly. And his white ability gives him evasion through flying. This thing basically builds itself to be a Boros Aristocrats hybrid, doesn't it? Well, who am I to fight against a card that I love so much? Let's do that. And before we do it, I want to mention that the cost of this deck is higher than usual. If you want to cut the cost down, there are a couple of big money cards in here, and removing those will get you down to the normal price point of the decks that I build on this channel. Now then, I found today's build for $203.22 on the day that the script was written, if you're buying it from TCG Player. And if you are, please consider using my affiliate link, found in the video description. You can also support me at my small Patreon page, also linked in the video description. And finally, if you enjoyed this video, please remember to tap that like button. If you're new here, I'd be honored to also have you subscribe. Now, on to the deck tech. The very first thing we want to do with this deck is cast Zabaz. The second thing we want to do is dependent on our hand. This may well be the time to cast a ramp spell, but we also have the option of maybe casting a modular creature, so I'm going to start with those. The majority of our modular creatures are these. At 3 mana or fewer, we have Arcbound Mouser, Arcbound Worker, Arcbound Prototype, Arcbound Ravager, Arcbound Stinger, Arcbound Shikari, and Arcbound Tracker. Arcbound Ravager is also another sacrifice outlet, and his death can really power Zabaz up quickly. At 4 mana or more, we have Arcbound Crusher, Arcbound Reclaimer, Arcbound Whelp, Arcbound Slasher, and Arcbound Overseer. You may have noticed that a lot of these modular creatures have evasion. That can be nice because if someone has removed Zabaz for whatever reason and you can't get him back easily, any of these evasive modular creatures can do a fine job of Voltron. Alright, the next thing we're going to want to do is ramp, if we haven't already. Our normal old mana rocks are Everflowing Chalice, Boros Signet, the Fire and Marble Diamonds, Mindstone, and Commander's Sphere. We could have gone a little lower on the mana value here, but I really enjoy the possibility of sacrificing Mindstone and Commander's Sphere to draw cards, and then recurring them. Feel free to add a Soul Ring in place of Commander's Sphere if you want to go lower on the mana value route instead. For land ramp, we're running Wayfarer's Bauble, Mycosynth Wellspring, which isn't actually ramp, but no one's looking, so let's just jam it in here, Burnished Heart, Scaretiller Sorta, and Solemn Simulacrum. The easiest things to recur or reanimate in this deck are going to be artifact creatures, so most of these will probably give you multiple uses. We do have more sacrifice outlets than just Zabaz and Arcbound Ravager in this deck. These outlets are Goblin Welder, Daretti Scrap Savant, Trading Post, Brea's Apprentice, and Spawning Pit. Those first three will help recur our artifacts, while Brea's Apprentice will sacrifice artifacts in order to impulse draw, or maybe help Zabaz get just powerful enough to reach that magic number of 7, 14, or 21. Finally, Spawning Pit sacrifices creatures for free in order to create even more artifact creatures. And since I've already shown you a chunk of the recursion in this deck, let's just show you some more. And these more are Together Forever, Scrap Trawler, and Sigil of the New Dawn. Scrap Trawler only works with artifacts, including artifact creatures, while Together Forever and Sigil of the New Dawn can work with both our artifact creatures and our non-artifact creatures. That said, we only have 5 non-artifact creatures, and 4 of those come without any counters on them, so Together Forever is largely here as a cheap way to recur our many modular creatures. So we're getting value from all this artifact aristocrat style of play by powering Zabaz up, or one of our other modular creatures, but that's a very narrow way to win, so we probably should include some others. So to help with this issue, we are running these payoff cards for when our artifact creatures die. First up is Ashes of the Aberrant, which also pulls duty as a graveyard hate card if people are casting directly from their graveyard, Gate to the Afterlife, Moonlit Wake, Basri's Lieutenant, which is our non-artifact creature that can enter with a counter on it, Martyr's Bond for keeping our board very tidy, and the potentially burn cards, Pia's Revolution and Stalking Vengeance. Pia's Revolution's damage is voluntary, but if they choose not to get drained out by Pia's Revolution, you'll just start steamrolling them with value from Zabaz and the other modular creatures instead. Recurring all of these creatures is great, but it would be even better if we could use them immediately after recurring them. To help with this, we have Crashing Drawbridge, Alibu, Ancient Witness, and Shimmermere. The first 2 of those give haste to our artifact creatures, and the last one gives flash to them, which can let us cast them as combat tricks, and it also works kinda like haste as long as we cast them before it reaches our next turn. That takes care of most of our game plan. Now we just need to keep that value coming. To help with that, we have these card draw spells: Inheritance, Skull Clamp, Ichor Wellspring, which when Zabaz is on the field basically says pay 3 mana, draw 2, which is a rate of return that I will take in Boros any day of the week. Mask of Memory, Lochiel Clockwork Scholar, Combustible Gearhulk, and Rune Grinder, which can fill our graveyard and or our hand quickly, either of which is a win for us. And of course we have Ugin the Ineffable. Ugin's card draw comes when his chump blocker spirits die. Helpfully, Ugin also makes our commander, and a bunch of other spells, free to cast thanks to the mana cost reduction on colorless spells. And of course he also destroys permanents of one or more color. Super useful card, and super underrated planeswalker. So we've kept our game plan going, and it's time to protect it, and maybe disrupt our opponent's game plans. This means removal, and besides Ugin and Martyr's Bond, we are running these. Arcbound Javelineer, who starts small but has modular, Blood Frenzy, which can be used in some very interesting ways, Dismantling Wave, which can be a bit of a board wipe if cycled, but it's a big panic button board wipe because it'll remove almost all of our stuff, so be careful with it, and the artifact creatures, Tormod's Cryptkeeper, Duplicant, and Angel of the Runes. We're also running 3 board wipes besides Dismantling Wave, and these are Cataclysmic Gearhulk, Promise of Loyalty, and Single Combat. The idea with these is that we want to use the board wipes in one of 2 ways. The first is the classic way, when someone is getting out of control and targeted removal just won't do the trick, wipe the board to deal with it. Yes, these will let them keep their strongest thing, but it'll also keep their board under control. But there's a second way to use these board wipes that is useful to us. If we don't have a sacrifice outlet on hand, we can wipe the board to kill our own stuff, and these will ensure that one of our modular creatures does survive. And all of the counters from all of the other modular creatures that die will go on to that lone survivor, giving us, hopefully, the biggest creature on the board. Well, that's all of the spells, so let's quickly discuss our lands. I'm not putting a ton of color fixing in here due to us only being in 2 colors and the deck being extremely light on those colors, but we do have Command Tower, Myriad Landscape, Opal Palace, Power Depot, and Spider of Industry. For utility lands, we are running Forge of Heroes, Buried Rune, Hall of Heliod's Generosity, Emergence Zone, Rogue's Passage, Sunhome Fortress of the Legion, Ghost Quarter, Tectonic Edge, Mishra's Factory, and Urza's Factory. Finally, our basic lands are 11 mountains and 10 plains. And that has been 95 cards from this deck, which means it's time for our final segment, a segment that I watched too much Arrested Development before creating, a segment that I call The Final Countdown! Today's Final Countdown will be a countdown of our 5 most controversial cards in this deck, one of which is actually controversial. At number 5, we have our least most controversial card, and that card is Leonin Abunas. Leonin Abunas? Aside from its pronunciation being controversial, we have its effect. What's more annoying to our opponents than an Aristocrats deck gaining a bunch of value? An Aristocrats deck gaining a bunch of value while it can't be interacted with. But if people want interaction, they'd better specify what type of interaction, because our number 4 card is going to have you interacting with people over and over again, asking the same question. Are you going to pay for that? This card is Esper Sentinel. Whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, you'll get to draw a card unless they pay X, where X is Esper Sentinel's power. That starts at 1, but it is an artifact creature, so, modular. Just get it up to about 4 power and it becomes a white Mystic Remora. At number 3, I've decided that people haven't heard the question, are you going to pay for that? Enough. So I've also included a big money card. That card is Smothering Tithe. This has awesome synergy with Goblin Welder and its ilk, but where it really shines is with Rune Grinder. It's easy to see why the Rules Committee is a bit worried about wheel spells, when you can ramp like crazy in Boros using them. Oh, also, Martyr's Bond. How did I almost forget to mention Martyr's Bond here? Well, let's quit beating around the bush and get to the most controversial card at number 2. Yeah, I'm doing the most controversial card at number 2 instead of number 1 because this one is going to be a downer, and I'm much happier ending the video on a positive note. This is a card that could actually be considered controversial, not in an MTG the card game way, but instead in a real world way. This card is Enduring Renewal, and it marks the first time I've ever put a card illustrated by Harold McNeil in one of my videos. It's taken this long because I don't really agree with Harold McNeil, and I think his words and beliefs are harmful to society on a macro level, and downright hateful and hurtful on an individual level. Magic is a game for everyone, regardless of who they are or what they look like. I don't want to inadvertently give Harold a soapbox to stand on, so I'm done talking about him. What I will say is that I think we should enjoy the good things that people do. So Harold McNeil is the controversial part of this card. The non-controversial part of this card, all beliefs of the artist set aside, is that Harold's art is beautiful, and the effect on the card is just perfect for this deck. It's such a unique card. I just wish it had somebody else's name on it. Anyway, this card will fill our graveyard all while keeping our sacrifice, recur, cast, sacrifice loop going, almost all on its own. If we have recursion on the battlefield, we can still use the artifact creatures that end up in our graveyard too, either by returning them to our hands or reanimating them directly from the graveyard. But if you can't constitute putting this in your deck, go ahead and don't use Enduring Renewal. These decks aren't meant to be unmodified anyway. What I personally recommend as a replacement is Hofri Ghostforge. Hofri isn't a recursion spell, but he sure does work nicely in this deck. Well, with that serious one out of the way, let's move on to our number 1 card, which should be a bit lighter in tone. If Smothering Tithe didn't cost enough money for you, this one sure will. This card is Lifeline. Lifeline is going to set you back somewhere between $35 and $55 if you have to buy it, already making it a controversial pick for this inexpensive of a deck. But that's not the only controversial thing about it. It's also symmetrical, so I know some viewers won't like its inclusion. It also will anger opponents if they're playing anything other than a creature-based deck. It'll also anger you if you're up against another Aristocrats deck, because now you've just wasted $50 on a card that will help you lose the game. But man, when this thing is working as intended, you can become absolutely unstoppable. Now, part of that segment got a little darker than I intended, so what I just want to say, whatever your views and whatever the cards you choose to use, you're a person who deserves to have fun, and I hope you just get to enjoy a game meant to bring friends together and give them a great experience. That's all this deck is meant to do, and it's all this channel is meant to encourage. So go forth with cards clutched in one hand and dice in the other, and enjoy your life as you choose to play it. Alright, that's the whole deck. This is probably one of my favorite decks that I've built for this channel. I love Aristocrats and playing off-color, so that's probably not really a surprise to anyone who's been following this channel for a while. But the point is, I'm very happy to present this deck to you today. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and leave a like. If you're just passing through, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching today, and I'll see you next time.